Good afternoon, and welcome to a special edition of Here's the Deal on a Saturday afternoon, 3 o'clock, live from Marvin's studio.
I was going to say live and in studio, but here we are.
How are you, bud?
I'm doing pretty okay, man.
Good.
It's a great day. It's a gorgeous day outside, and today we have a guest joining us that was supposed to join last night, but she had something come up, and we were grateful that we were able to get her on, and excited that Shilo was actually down in town. So before we bring her on, I've known Naomi's family for a long time. Her father, Kurt, is the pastor over at New Song Church. He actually married Sarah and I in 2010. So it's been a minute. A lot of great things going on over there. I met Naomi officially in person this last Sunday. Riley Gaines was in town to talk about her journey and with collegiate swimming, and it was an amazing event. And we were really glad to get to sit and listen to that. But yeah, we got a chance to talk with Naomi too. We stayed after service. Riley stayed and answered questions for almost another 45 minutes about just general questions. And then I sat in on the Turning Point Faith meeting that they had. And so we had invited both Naomi and Kurt to join us. Kurt will join a different day. He's super busy the next couple weeks. But without much ado, let's bring Naomi on and let her introduce herself and kind of tell you about her journey.
Sounds good.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good. Yeah.
So,
I'll keep going. Sorry.
No, the floor is yours. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved? And
yeah, absolutely. So my name is Naomi Chaffee. I am with Turning Point USA Faith. So I have a little bit of an interesting journey. So I originally grew up in Bismarck, North Dakota, and then I moved to Kansas City during COVID, so 2020, and I lived there for 2 years. And then I sort of got involved in film and stunt performing. And then after that, I moved to Atlanta to seriously pursue stunt performing and film. And I was there for a year, but then because of the strike, SAG-AFTRA, the union I'm a part of, is currently still on strike. So I decided to move back to Bismarck, just, see what God had for me. And my dad had reached out to me about this position. And it was a Turning Point USA Faith. And I was like, this is cool. I've always been, involved in politics. And, I was a part of the Young America's Foundation. So it just really interested me. And, I moved up here and started this position. And I'm just like, this is totally God working, because, the connections that I'm making, the things that he's doing, the things our group is doing is just absolutely incredible. So, the goal of Turning Point USA Faith's mission is to be able to engage and equip Christians to go out and change the trajectory of our nation, but specifically in Bismarck and, the state of North Dakota. So we do this by a few different ways. We do this by talking about legislation, going to school board meetings, doing public comments, having classes, just all of that kind of stuff. And we're really on an incline from where we started to where we are today, which is super incredible to see that the community, people of all ages, want to get involved and, stop this woke culture from, entrapping our state, because we do see it. It's happening, especially in Fargo and Grand Forks. NDSU just had their homecoming royalty come out, and it was 2 dudes. And it's so interesting about that situation, because I'm like, in my eyes as a woman, I'm like, okay, they're obviously taking a spot away from a woman to be the queen. And I had a gal message me that was on the homecoming court. She said, no, I don't feel like that at all. I feel like we're giving the opportunity to non-binary people. And I'm like, okay, so a dude. So gender identity isn't real. It's a social construct. You can't be bound by something that's not real. So it's a guy. And she just didn't message me back. And I was like, all right, that's fine. So that's a little bit about what we are doing right now and the position that I've stepped in with Turning Point USA Faith.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Turning Point? It's a national organization, correct?
Yeah, so Turning Point USA is separate from Turning Point USA Faith. The faith division is just like an aspect of it like a breakoff section that mostly is involved in churches and I would say more of community. But then Turning Point USA is like high schools, colleges, and that's where Charlie goes and goes to colleges, and they all have their college tours and they challenge students' perspectives. And they're a huge leader right now in the conservative movement. And it's just really great because they've found a way to capture young people's minds to be able to push them towards fighting for what's moral. Because I think a lot of the time the left, the Democrats typically have been really good at relying on people's apathy to get them on their side. But now we have Turning Point USA where it's like, oh, we don't need to rely on people's apathy and create these peoples that are victims to speak out. When in reality, they're just, I don't know. I'm not saying that some of them aren't victims, but a lot of it's just complaining and like, oh, I don't feel comfortable in my body, so I'm going to be transgender, instead of looking at like the core issue. So yeah, so it's a little bit about Turning Point USA in itself. And my dad and I had just went to a Turning Point USA Faith Pastoral Conference in San Diego, and we got to hear from, big time pastors and Charlie and just people of all ages, and it was really, really incredible.
Oh, you said Charlie there twice. That's Charlie Kirk, right?
Oh yeah, Charlie Kirk. Yep.
Okay, yeah. So when I sat in on the meeting, you guys had like 5 main areas of focus that you wanted to look at.
Yeah.
You okay going through those with us? Or?
Yeah, let me break out my phone. I'm still trying to like break them down more and still get people's opinions on it. Just because I think that's really important in the type of group that we are creating is people feel like what we're doing is worth their time. Because you see a lot of volunteers get burnt out and don't see the impact that they're doing, especially just from like hanging up flyers. 100% important, 100% needed to further the mission of what we're doing. So let me see if I can go ahead and find that here.
So you've always been kind of, while you're looking, you've always been kind of involved with theater, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah. What's funny is I did find it, by the way, but I'll talk about this after. But yeah, I've always been involved in theater. For a while, I actually was pretty liberal, especially in the theater community, because it's like that's sort of where the liberal Democrat people tend to fall, because for some reason they just have more of a creative mindset, which I love. But yeah, so I did that growing up, and that's sort of how I got into film. But there's a really great quote. I don't remember who said it, but I heard Candace Owens say it. She was quoting someone. She said, "If you're young and you're a liberal, you have a heart. But if you get older and you're a conservative, you have a brain." So I feel like that definitely applies to me, because I think a lot of the time with like liberal people, they do have that apathy, which isn't necessarily always bad. But letting it take over and create your decisions based purely on feelings is not a good way to go about making decisions in your life or how this country should be ran. So yeah, I did theater and I was a little bit liberal, but now that I'm conservative and working in film, there is a community in film, and I would say it's more of the successful people that tend to be conservative because they see how it affects what they're doing and they see how it affects their house, their income, just all of that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, it was a great time.
You got a question before she gets
Yeah,
here?
so I've recently started kind of following Jordan Peterson.
Oh yeah, yep.
And he did an interview with Bill Maher, and I kind of found it interesting. I find Bill Maher, because I've kind of watched a couple of his different interviews now, and he's admitted that he doesn't quite agree with what's going on as far as the liberal side of things, but he's saying that the liberals, they've gotten more to the left than maybe they usually were. And just with you saying that you were at one time more liberal than you are now, do you think it's because you don't agree necessarily with what where they're at, or do you think you've actually come to the quote unquote right more?
When I was liberal, I'm trying to think of the things that I cared about. I cared about people being treated equally. I cared about women having their rights and not being overtaken by men. I cared about I don't want to say Black Lives Matter because of everything that has been revealed, but the premise of what that was when it first came out, I believed in. Because I mean, this I can go on about this, but I won't right now. But those are the types of things that I deeply cared about because I cared about
Mhm.
people. I cared about people being
Right.
treated equally and being treated fair. But then once you start to look into this kind of stuff, oh well, where did all the money go for Black Lives Matter? Oh, it went into the owners' mansions. It's like, how backwards is that? And
Yeah.
I don't think anyone that is conservative from my point of view that I personally know, and of course there are going to be people out there like this, but people aren't trying to like there aren't pro segregation, people aren't racist, people aren't against like people don't hate trans people, people don't hate gay people. We just have a different perspective on how the world should be ran. And my dad says it all the time, like, love everyone, but you don't have to love what they're doing. You don't have to love their sin because God hates sin, right?
Right.
Um, I always hear people say, well, love is love. And I'm like, well, especially as a Christian and seeing other Christians say this, it's like love rejoices in truth. People always forget that. And if you try to break them apart, it loses its divine nature. And then they just get skewed by, the worldly perspective on what the two things are. So
Yeah.
I think at the time, because I was probably liberal like 2018 to 2020, granted, at that point in my life, I was still young. I was rebelling against being a pastor's daughter, doing things I
Mhm.
probably shouldn't have been. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people in that space are just hurting and they're lost and they try to fill the void that they have in their heart with earthly, worldly things. I'm a philosophy pre-law major, and there's this two existential philosophers. It was it wasn't Thomas Aquinas. It was, I'm trying to think of who it was, but there's this one Christian philosopher. He was the founder of existentialism, and then there was Jean-Paul Sartre, who was an existentialist, but he was also an atheist. And both of them came to the same conclusion that people have a God-sized hole in their heart. And Sartre said you can never fill it. And then the other philosopher said that you fill it with God. I'm trying to remember who it was. It's on the tip of my tongue, but anyways, so I think both sides recognize that there is a hole in our hearts. There's a hole in humanity. There's immorality, but then it's like both sides just choose to look at it differently. One side embraces immorality because it makes them feel good in the moment, but it doesn't actually solve the hole in their heart. And then the other side uses God to fill that hole in their heart. And, it ends up being moral because, Christianity is based off of biblical moral standards. So,
Mhm.
So what do you got there for us?
yeah. So I've come up with a couple of different factions, 5 factions, and I'm still like hashing it out. But the first one is education. So this would include going to school board meetings when certain policies go against our mission. It could also include going to places such as Fargo, excuse me, or Grand Forks and talking about their insane woke policies, which to a certain degree, it's like I don't want people like woke people from Fargo coming to Bismarck to like express their woke policies, but I also a huge thing in all of these and what I see in legislation too is a lot of our laws are reactionary to immorality. So one of my goals right now to end with Keep USA Faith is to press people to legislate morality rather than being reactionary.
Right.
Uh sorry.
No, you're good.
No,
Keep
Okay.
going.
that's that
No,
right. Yeah.
yeah,
I
Yeah.
agree with you.
So and I would like to get involved somehow on the federal level with the board or the Department of Education, but I think that's going to be a little bit out of my scope right now because I mean, I was looking through Bismarck, the BPS policies or whatever, and under discrimination, it's a federal regulation, so we can't change it at the state level. But in their discrimination policy, they now include gender identity. And I talked to the superintendent, Dr. Vosnot about it. And he's like, yeah, that's not really something we can change because that's a federal thing. And he's like, I agree with you. I feel like that's already covered under sex, but also we shouldn't be discriminating against people that are trans or whatever. And I'm not saying discriminate people based on whatever, but I think allowing this is just it's just horrible because you're just giving into this idea that what they're doing is okay. And one thing I'm also pushing for right now is to be able to ban pronouns at BPS for gender identity purposes, because I know a couple of teachers that, just from students that have talked to me, and this has been a battle in itself, but I feel like it's the beginning of the process of indoctrination, because if you're a student, maybe like 5th grade or whatever, you go up to the board, what is she her on the board, teacher? Oh, it's because I'm a woman. Well, aren't you already a woman? Well, actually gender is fluid. So I think that's where the indoctrination process begins in that aspect. But and this isn't to call anyone out, but I had someone on the board specifically tell me that they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to anger the LGBTQ plus community. And I'm like,
No,
well, if you're scared about that, then we can't, create policies to fight against immorality. We're just going to be reactionary, and that's not what we want to be. So that's sort of the
hold up a
education.
second.
Yeah, what's up?
Hold up a second right there. So gender identity, the argument for this, it's actually not in U.S. code. It has not been passed by the House. It has not been passed by the Senate. And the only reason that all these schools are clinging to it now, and it's part of when I talked about the hate crime ordinance that they brought up in Bismarck,
Mm-hmm.
it was put into place by an executive order by the president. It's not on code, it's not on law. And that was something that I pointed out with Bismarck, is if they're going to include gender identity or perceived race into all their verbiage for this hate crime ordinance, which they were actually lessening the crime for, they were lessening the crime, they were lessening the fines, they were lessening the time. But if they were going to include gender identity and perceived race, then they needed to go through every section of their title and fix it for their housing policies, for their employment policies, for their, like, they had to go line by line through their own codes, or they're going to be in violation of the ordinance that they're trying to put in place. And it's the same thing. And I said the same thing at the meeting, that Grand Forks and Fargo needed to address it.
Yeah.
Because right now, Fargo, the hate crimes that they've had that have actually been filed and committed, doesn't go through Fargo. It gets taken over by the FBI, by the Federal Hate Crime Division.
Wow.
So if you arrest somebody for a hate crime, you can't even prosecute in North Dakota. It goes straight to federal level if it's deemed an actual hate crime.
Wow.
So with the school boards in the cities and stuff, and this is something that I've talked to, if you're going to speak at a commission meeting, like, you don't necessarily, and it's great to express your emotion, your opinion,
right.
but when you're speaking with these groups, you have to bring that fact.
Absolutely. 100%.
You have to bring the actual law that they're trying to represent and point out the flaws in this.
Right.
So like the executive orders from the president, it's like the executive orders from the governor. In 2020, we saw the governor passing, what was it? It was almost 60 some executive orders throughout the course of 2020, where he was changing, where he was disconnecting laws, where he was suspending laws, including licensing, registration, background checks for your kids, on top of what the state health officer was doing by passing state health officer executive orders, which was what was trying to shut down businesses, which was trying to shut down schools. Now, the kicker to all that is there was attorneys that were out there saying, oh, well, it's the law because the governor said it. The executive branch cannot make a law, folks.
Yep.
The executive branch cannot make the law.
Absolutely.
And that's why when they started changing the smart restart, all of a sudden, and this is the power of words, they started removing the must and shall and started putting in may.
Wow.
Or should. Because they changed the smart restart guidelines, I want to say 6 or 7 times.
Wow.
And that's why the first time they shut down churches, all of a sudden, if you look at the second executive order that came out, they just implied social distancing. They no longer removed congregation from their verbiage because of the separation of church and state. The government cannot infringe upon a church, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't bring your religious beliefs to the Capitol steps when you come to an elected position.
Yep.
So back to what this principal said, it's in place because of a White House executive order. It has not been put to the U.S. code the last time I checked, unless they passed something in the last year.
Right. That's really good to know. For anyone watching, I also highly recommend to get like a pocket constitution. I carry mine always in my purse just because one, I think it's cool and I feel like I have clout from it from myself. But two, I think it's just good to have on hand because, you know, I mean, it's your best friend in this country, you know, especially with right now, the times.
Well, and what's funny about when I spoke in Bismarck, they actually in the back of every one of the seats had their equal housing pamphlets right there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually came to the podium with the pamphlet and pointed out that they would have to fix their own wording by adding 2 non-federally recognized classes to a hate crime ordinance. So it's not that I was speaking out against a community or I was trying to divide a community or I stood a certain way. It's you have to have that common sense when you come to these commissions and councils, because I can tell you the hour leading up to when I was able to speak was chaos from both sides.
Yeah.
You can't have a good conversation without common sense, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, any one of the protected classes. Like you can't have that conversation unless you're just going to sit and have a conversation to see each other's point of views.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Back to where you were at here.
Oh, yeah. Just one thing about that too. My dad always says that it doesn't matter the title that you have, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, whatever. But if you base your morals on the Bible, I mean, that is where you should stand. And I guess a title might follow that, but that's not something that stops one from being a Christian, you know?
It's,
yeah.
He's right on that. It's not Democrat versus Republican anymore. It's good versus evil.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Well, and to a certain degree too, I think it's Constitution versus anarchists.
True enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we just had a great comment come in from somebody through our Telegram chat. He said, I'm for defending government and public schools at a state and federal level, especially quit funding them with property taxes. We would be better off if schools were directly funded privately or do something at a county local level.
Absolutely.
I wanted to actually hire a teacher or teachers with a small group of other parents. And when I found out that the almighty fist of overbearing government doesn't allow what I was trying to do, I can homeschool sort of in North Dakota. Isn't exactly the best on that either. South Dakota, way better than North Dakota in regards to policy. But yet a few of us would like to school our kids at our homes and hire an actual teacher ourselves. Can't legally do that in North Dakota. And that's because homeschool pods are illegal. We've tried getting legislation passed.
Really?
Yes.
Huh.
We've tried getting legislation passed. I want to try and get legislation passed again for.
I would back you up on that, honestly. I would help you out with that because that's so wild. You know, back in like the colonial era and even like after the Constitution was enacted, during that time period, they would elect their teachers. And it wasn't a federal thing. And it's just so interesting to see. And I mean, especially during that time period, I mean, Christianity was at the core of what these people were doing. I mean, not to get into separation of church and state right now. But yeah, I mean, Bibles were in schools. I mean, you'll see biblical things and scriptures or whatever on like all of these like important places that we have in the United States. I mean, on the Supreme Court, it has Moses holding the 10 Commandments, and people are like, oh no, that's just a guy holding some tablets. And I'm like, okay, well, whatever. And people can go visit these old schoolhouses, you know, they'll see the verses on the wall, they'll see the Bibles in there, you know. So I would 100% back you up on that because that I think is what we need to do right now in our country.
Oh, well, and Shilo and I are both homeschooling.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So
nice.
like we're We're part of a larger group too, but they are a recognized group that Sarah and I are, that meet, and it's more conversation based.
Yeah.
It's Bible based, it's faith based, which is awesome.
Oh, that's
But
incredible.
but for me, I'm tired of the rules for thee and not for me.
Yeah.
I'm tired of the policies that you see.
Yeah.
And it's like people talk to me about the gender reassignment stuff, and not to hang on this, but if you look at it this way, we have a president that's pushing to allow it, yet your health insurance folks, if you have any sort of infertility issues, consider it an elective as a surgery, and people are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars so that they can have a child.
You know what's funny about that too? I don't remember which school Leah Thomas went to. It might have been Pennsylvania, but I was talking when Riley was here, Riley Gaines. I was talking to her about it, and the school had paid for Leah Thomas's surgery, um, gender reassignment or whatever sex surgery. The school literally paid for that, and that's
That's a
insane.
state-funded institute.
Yep.
Correct?
Actually, I think it was. It might be no, it's a private school. It was a private school. Yeah, I think it was a private school. But even so, it's like, why is a school spending their money on someone's sex change surgery? Like, it's ridiculous.
Well, in this last session was the first time they've addressed our legislative assemblies addressed infertility stuff. They actually had a bill come through. I don't know if it passed, but it was to allow for state workers to receive assistance for infertility.
Wow.
And when I spoke with somebody that works up at the insurance commission, he said, usually when you see something like this, it's going to be a test run for a larger basis, which would be amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't joke when I say our little girls are miracles. Sarah and I went through almost a decade of infertility stuff.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you the amount that we spent. But even just the process, like your insurance automatically says it's elective.
Right.
If you look at the definitions of pregnancy in your insurance, it's actually considered an illness.
Wow. That's absolutely ridiculous. I cannot believe that. And it's weird because as a woman, I'm like, why are other women not stepping up to fight against this kind of stuff? I don't know.
Well, and I was having the conversation yesterday about how more and more stuff is getting stripped away, and like your king and queen or your royalty court.
Royalty.
You think about it, a century ago, the women's suffrage movement was at its height, giving women the ability to vote. You look at everything that's happened with women's sports over the years, you look at that stuff, like they've fought so hard to get this stuff instilled.
I know.
Even equal opportunity employment, stuff like that. It's a thing. Equal pay for equal work. And now it seems like we're reverting backwards. So I don't know if you're where I am, Shilo, but and that's where it comes back to the rules for thee and not for me.
Right.
You look at our legislative assembly. In 2019, they made it so that you can't open records requests any of their emails.
What?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I could guess a couple of names that voted yay on that.
Yeah. So we're seeing where they shelter themselves, but they aren't protecting the people that elected them there. So
that's insane. There should be like some sort of like, I don't want to say forced meeting, but I think just citizens need to actually take the time to look into people's records, into what they stand for, what they do. And it's not to like try to villainize these people. I don't care if, they're doing whatever in their free time, but if they're voting against their constituents, the people that quite literally elected them in, and they're using it as a position of power rather than a position to help, the people that elected them, I'm just like, there needs to be something where people are actually engaged, because I was saying earlier at our biblical citizenship class today that it can be one vote difference if people win or lose. One vote, especially at the state level. Federal level, it's a different topic, but state level, it's like one vote, one person can change the outcome.
Okay, so we were on number 2 there, I think, where you were going through your list.
Oh, yep.
What else you got? Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. So 2 is legislation and policies. So this
Yep.
would be looking at bills, if they're biblical or not. And the stuff that you were talking about, you did last legislative session. I applaud you for, and I think that you would be a great resource for this area, because I know I want to get involved. So and just an example of this too is Linda Thorson. I think that's her last name. She's Thorson. She's the head of Concerned Women of America, and she in Bismarck, or in North Dakota. And she had sent me this one random hearing that was happening. It was with the Marriage and Family Therapy licensing board. It was a couple weeks ago, and the meeting was scheduled by the Attorney General at the Capitol, and they were trying to pass a policy to where people couldn't do conversion therapy, whether you're LGBTQ plus or whatever. So it's basically like anything included to help these people go away from the immoral life that they were hoping to seek or were currently seeking. And this would include like detransition surgery and that kind of stuff. So that was not made publicly known. I mean, you'd have to go on the Capitol website to look through all of the scheduled meetings that they have and read through, and that takes a lot of time. So after she told me that, I'm like, this one is incredibly important. Just someone even just sitting down and looking through the website to see if there's any sketchy things going on. Because I walked in the room to make my public comment or whatever, and they were just chilling. They were just like hanging out, and I sort of walked in, and I was just like, is this like the meeting or whatever? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, there's no one in there. So it was just really weird. So a huge part of that too is, making sure things aren't just slipping under the rug, and that we're actively trying to seek these immoral things trying to be passed. So that's part 2. If you guys have any comments on that.
No, I mean, we can keep rolling. Sorry I interrupted on the first
Oh,
part.
no, you're totally good. It's great conversation. And then 3 would be finances. So this would just be helping do grant writing, help get donors to sponsor our event. And you'll find like people that are passionate about this kind of stuff, that tend to want to give, have a giveful or a giving heart. They don't feel weird about giving money to support a cause. So that's another aspect of it too. And then 4th would be community outreach. So this would, being at community events, talking to people, setting up all our classes around the state and the city, bringing in speakers to our TPUSA Faith group to like help engage and equip us. And I might make that like a 6th branch of like equipping just in general. But then 5th is volunteering, and this would include like hanging up posters, posting about it on social media, reaching out to local news stations, just stuff like that. So that's sort of like the 5/6 branches I have currently created. I'm still fleshing them out and just trying to see where the Lord leads me in that aspect. But yeah, that's sort of the general gist of what we're working on right now.
Yeah, and that's kind of a repetitive theme that we've had. Shilo actually spoke last night a little bit towards the end of the show about, when it comes to your donors, make sure that they have the same intentions at heart.
Absolutely, 100%.
And that's something that we'll see is, you'll have these groups, you'll have these great movements, you'll have donors that are supporting them, but it doesn't take long for somebody to say, oh, well, now you owe me a favor too.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think this goes back to my sort of philosophy on, these types of groups, these types of ministries, is when you have donors, you make them feel like what they're doing is worth it, because they are playing a huge part in being able to continue the movement forward. And that's, again, just with like volunteers, is making sure that they feel like their time is worth it. Because if it's not, and they don't feel like they're just being wasted, then they're going to quit. I mean, I've been in that position multiple times, and I'm just like, this sucks. So just engaging with volunteers and also your donors is just, I think, incredibly important.
So I've always had kind of an interesting journey with faith. but Sarah recently got to experience part of it. I was actually supposed to, or I was looking at going into seminary because I was the St.
Oh,
Mary's
wow.
boy back in the day.
Oh, gotcha.
But I wanted
The
to
cemetery?
seminary. Oh, priesthood.
Cemetery. Oh, that's funny.
But I wanted to have a family. I felt that there was more to life for me than doing that. But
Right.
I think by the time I was a senior, I'd gone cover to back on the Bible like 6 or 7 times.
Wow.
And I've always had that journey where I have issues with pastors that misquote the Bible to push an agenda.
You see it everywhere now. It's like people don't try to use the historical context in which, the things were said, because I mean, the Bible is obviously a religious book, but it's also a history book. Like, you have to understand what was happening at the time in order to accurately present what the Bible says.
Well, and like just recently I heard, and I haven't been able to find the sermon, I'm looking for it, but I heard of a pastor in North Dakota that compared sodomy to inhospitality.
What?
Yeah. Sodomy compared to inhospitality.
Oh my gosh.
And the person I was talking with, I'm like, did they miss the whole pillars of salt thing? Or
Holy crap. Ooh.
so like it's in our churches, but where I was going with this is when you talk about volunteering, Sarah, our another church that we were going to here right through COVID, actually got into it with the pastor about tithing.
Wow.
Because she was a stay-at-home mom. She goes,
Mhm.
I'm supposed to give my 10% to the Lord. And she had questioned being able to donate time, to donate vegetables, to be able to do that form of tithing versus monetarily.
Right.
And there was a giant pushback on, no, like, this is how you do it. But I'm pretty sure that's what started the fight with Cain and Abel in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're volunteering, I mean, you're donating your time to
Absolutely.
something that you believe in.
Absolutely.
Like, as far as I'm concerned, that's tithing too. Because
Yeah.
if you don't have monetary contributions, if you can't donate to a cause, by all means, folks, please support what they're doing, even if it's stuffing envelopes,
Yeah.
making phone calls, sharing posts, or knocking on the doors.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all so crucial.
When
Yeah.
it-
Yeah. Keep going. Sorry.
When it comes down to it, this is, and Steve kind of talks about this quite a bit, about how we get into these man-made theologies and stuff, especially when it comes to religion. Now, he's run a fellowship down there in Texas for almost 30 years, and they've never taken an offering once. And he won't tell you this. I found out just by doing some research and stuff, but that little ministry down, or they don't even call it a ministry, they call it a fellowship. That fellowship down there, they've built houses in other countries. They've taken care of their
Wow.
own right there in Texas. And we're talking thousands, millions of dollars that they've come up with, and they've never taken an offering once.
Wow.
In fact, there was a story, they do have a bucket like near the entrance of the church that people do put money in, but it's the one story that I heard was one of the kids that attends there took some because he didn't have enough to get a gift for his parents. And it was a long story, but the parents thought that he had taken out of that bucket for his own gain. And Steve had stepped in and said, no, because I gave him permission to, he said, I knew about it. I told him to do that so he could get what he needed for you guys for this gift for Christmas or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so, and the kid ended up putting it back, when he had it. But they've done many, many things.
Right.
And you wouldn't know it. I mean, he's a horse auctioneer by trade.
Oh, wow.
but he also, when he got saved 27 years ago, and see, that's the other thing too, is, and he kind of spoke about this last week, is when you get saved, people say, well, you need to go to church and do this and that. And he's like, I got saved by getting drunk and driving in my pickup. He's like, do I recommend getting drunk and driving in your pickup?
Oh.
No, that's where I seen Jesus.
Oh
And,
my goodness.
and so I just, I have a hard time with that kind of stuff, where, because in my opinion, a lot of these churches, that's the way it's gotten, is it's about um bending these Bible verses to for profit, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. And
No, absolutely.
there's a lot of it that goes on. And
Yeah.
so whatever happened about, you know, reading the Bible, that's what we're supposed to do, read the Bible, live it, right?
Yeah.
We treat people how we want to be treated. It's not just we get in a pile for an hour and sing the songs and blow some snot and we're done for the week, right? We go out and then nothing changes. We just go back to living the way we were. To me, it's more important about living what we're reading, and being obedient and asking for his mercy, and um you know repenting.
Yeah. Any church that doesn't have repentance in their values, automatic red flag.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's what it's about to me. And I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I know in the last, so September 11th, it was a year when that I got saved, and I know from that time it's not easy. That's
Yeah.
for darn sure, but
Yeah.
um life's gotten a lot better when you try and live like that, like live the word and be in his word, and because that's what he wants, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
It's also liberating because it's like I don't feel like I have a curtain that I need to hide behind anymore. I'm just going to say what is biblical and people can hate me. I mean,
right.
Jesus said people hated me first. So don't be surprised when the world hates you. And, he also says that narrow is the path. And if you
Mhm.
find it, so when people are on that path, I mean, the world is going to hate them, but you just find such liberation and not caring about what the world thinks because you answer to God at
Right.
the end of the day, right?
Yep.
So yeah.
Well,
Eh,
even
Go.
with starting the show, like, so in June, we started the show, and it was Luke Simons and I, and it was just two guys getting together, and basically at first it was kind of a running joke between him and I, and but we took it serious to a point. I mean, we had guests on, and we were doing the North Dakota politics thing and that, and it kind of just blossomed. But getting to your point there, as I got further into his word, and by all means, I'm nowhere near where I need to be. I
Right.
still work on that every day. Getting back to being liberated, if you go back and you watch our shows from when Luke and I first started to where Marvin and I are now, there's a difference in
Absolutely.
myself. Like, I'm more free, and sometimes Marvin has to pump the brakes on me a little bit, which I'm grateful for. But
Yeah.
you know, you're exactly right on the whole liberation thing. That doesn't mean you should just spout off anytime
Oh,
you
right.
want
Yeah.
to.
I mean, there's a time and a place.
Right.
Absolutely. I'm not just walking down the street shouting,
Yeah.
"Trans people aren't people." I'm not like
Right.
that's not how you do that.
No, and it comes back to treating people with respect.
Mhm.
Absolutely,
And,
100%.
and so, like, my first journey on the masks were because our house, we can't wear masks. And it evolved where, after the first time I spoke about it, because of things that we have going on with our health in our house, um, I had people that came up and thanked me afterwards because I said what they wanted to say that they didn't have the
Yep.
courage to stand up and say.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was willing to speak about the kids with disabilities that couldn't wear masks. I was
Yeah.
willing to talk about the things that nobody wanted to talk about.
Yep.
And I've always, and this is something that I'll encourage anybody that goes to these commissions, you're not there to fight the audience.
Yep.
You're not there to fight with the city, the county, your legislators. You are there to present them information that they can reflect on before they make a decision.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I've always had the philosophy that I will treat any person with the same level of respect that they treat me.
Absolutely. Yep.
And when I first meet a person, I don't make any assumptions on anybody.
For sure. Absolutely.
So, like, you and I were texting before the show, and I said I've worked very hard to avoid any labels.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be known as a Christian. I want to be known as a husband and a father. And I want to be known for my common sense.
Yeah.
Because I hate how we continuously see news articles pop up where somebody's a ultra conservative or they're a right-wing nut or they're
Yeah.
I don't care. Like, I want to know you as a person.
Absolutely.
And so when you go out and do these events and when you go out and speak and you go out, like, come with fact. You can add emotion, but like we had a comment that just popped up, be an advocate for yourself and for others.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something that people need to learn. Like when
Absolutely.
I went to that hate crime ordinance, that was an angry crowd.
I bet.
It was an angry crowd. And I wasn't there to speak against the ordinance. I wasn't there to speak for one side or the other. I was there to point out to our Bismarck City Commission what they were about to do was super illegal.
Right. Yeah.
So, all right. But back to where you're at. Let's hear, what are your plans for the next couple months here?
Yeah, so I'm finishing up my bachelor's here in a couple weeks, so I'm really excited about that. I'm a philosophy pre-law major because I'm a nerd. I also just think philosophy and pre-law is cool. Some philosophy, I feel like some philosophers just think and think themselves into a despair, but I have a couple of my favorite philosophers. But then after, I'm gonna start studying for the LSAT actually on Monday, and then take that in January, and then go to law school after. So that's sort of my plan for right now. I mean, I'm doing like my little podcast and, whatever. It's Constitutional Chaffee, because the Constitution is very, very important to me. I mean, it goes God, family, country, in my opinion. And, based on the Bible, I feel like it's also that way. So I've been studying that just a ton, and I've been pulling a lot of inspiration from David Barton, Frank Turek, just all of those guys, because what they're doing is just incredible, because people don't know the true founding of our nation. I mean, it's not taught in schools. It's not taught that, we are based off of Judeo-Christian principles, because people just don't know the history. And this goes into a little bit of, separation of church and state, which I know we wanted to cover. I had made a video on it recently. It was just very dumbed down. But I mean, essentially, like, the history behind it is the Puritans had come over in the 1600s to the colonies to escape religious persecution from the Church of England, because that was the established church. So obviously, because they're the established church, the government has a huge role in, playing out what they do. So they came over here, and guess what happened? More established churches within the colonies. It was the Anglican Church, which is just another fancy name for the Church of England, and then the Congregational Church, which were typically the established churches which within the colonies. And again, because they're established, they're facing all of these. They're obtaining all these things from the government, that they get tax breaks, they get to decide the ministers. I mean, the people of that church get a vote. All of that kind of stuff was happening. So other denominations which were Christian, I mean, the country, the colonies in general were all Christian. I mean, there was a very, very small Jewish population, but there wasn't like Satanists, there wasn't like just all of these random crazy religions that we see now. It was Christian. So the other denominations were, they were being harassed, they were being discriminated against, but again, at the core, they were also Christian. And that would include like the Baptists, the Quakers, all of that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people don't understand that separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. It was in a letter. So a little bit of like a breakdown is, we have the Declaration of Independence, 1776. We have the Articles of Confederation, the first form of government in the United States. It failed. We have the Constitution written in 1878. Then the Bill of Rights was added 1791, and that's the First Amendment, where the government can't make any law respecting an establishment of government because of what was happening within the denominations within the colonies. It wasn't a Christian, Satanist, whatever. It wasn't that. It was a one-way wall to protect denominations from the government. And a little bit about this too is the first Supreme Court case ever that dealt with freedom of religion was Runkle versus Weinmiller in 1799. And it basically stated that, denominations can't be discriminated against, but the government can step in to address churches when necessary. I'm also just looking into like the Supreme Court case lineup of freedom of religion to see how skewed it has become right now. So that happened in 1799. And then the Danbury Baptists write to Jefferson in 1801, and they state, like just in short, they're like, we're worried about what's happening with denominations right now because they were in Connecticut, and Connecticut didn't get a state constitution until 1818. They had the fundamental orders of Connecticut, which was the original document that they had for their colony/state back in the 1600s when they first arrived. So they were worrying like, our constitution doesn't cover like religion that well. We're scared that, there's going to be continued discrimination against our denomination. And they were Baptists, right? So they were a minority within the denominations. So they write to Jefferson. Jefferson writes back in 1802, a year later. He's like, don't worry about it. There's separation of church and state. So you guys can't, the state can't create an established religion. And again, this was all in reference to denomination discrimination. It wasn't in reference to quite literally anything else. So I'm just, when people say separation of church and state, one, they don't know the history of the nation. Two, they haven't read the letter from the Danbury Baptists to Jefferson. And three, they didn't read the letter back from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptists. So all of this stuff, I'm just like, people just don't understand. And I'm not like an expert in American history, but I do my due diligence. I mean, I'm writing a book right now on specifically freedom of religion. So for people to whip that out without actually understanding what that means, it's just really sad. And they don't teach this in school, right? I mean, like Sarah was saying, Department of Education should be removed. I agree, because it is trash. So I mean, that's sort of like my spiel that, I give about separation of church and state. And, as I continue studying it and the Supreme Court cases, I'll just learn more. But again, this Jefferson wrote to them in 1802. The Bill of Rights was 1791. So it's like, for them to even be worrying about that after the Bill of Rights was created, it's like, what does that say about Christianity within, the nation at the time? It was the core religion. Again, if you go to any of like the original schoolhouses, or if you look at any of the government structures, you'll see Moses on the Supreme Courthouse holding the 10 Commandments. You'll go to the old schoolhouses, you'll see verses written on the wall, you'll see Bibles in the school. And then there's so many quotes from every single founding father, even the ones that were quote unquote deist. They understood that Christianity was moral and it was good, and to base a country off of that was so important, because if you don't have a moral standard, what do you have? My dad says, well, I would like, if you don't want me to press morality on you, what do you want me to push? Immorality? And I just think that's a little funny quote. But also, one thing that I also enjoy doing is I'll read through the original state constitutions, like Massachusetts, written by John Adams, which is one of the fundamental constitutions that, the actual constitution was based off of. And he was, a deist. That's what people say. But again, that term then versus now is very different. If you go read the Massachusetts Constitution, which he wrote, there's law after law describing the Christian God and the role it plays in government and society and education. So that's, again, sort of my little spiel that I give about separation of church and state, because people just don't understand.
So I heard you're writing a book. Is that true?
Yeah. So right now it's on the premise of it is on freedom of religion and the first Supreme Court case, which is Runkle versus Weinmiller, 1799. To now, and where we've gotten, how far away we've gotten from what the founding fathers intended. So the first part of it's going to go over like the history, the little history that I gave you guys, and like a much more in-depth context, just because it's really important. especially reading like something like the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which was in the 1600s, versus the state constitution for like Massachusetts, which was 1776. I believe it was 1770. No, it was 1780. It was something like that. It was before the actual constitution was written. I think it was in 1780s. You'll have to fact check me on that. But but yeah, so it's going over that history a little bit. Then it's going over every Supreme Court case ever with freedom of religion. And again, just seeing how skewed it's gotten, seeing how other religions have like warped their way into using the First Amendment to try to protect immorality. And again, I'm not saying that the United States should be a theocracy, because I don't believe that's what the founding fathers intended. But I think to get rid of the notion that we are based on biblical principles and that we should be legislating morality instead of legislating immorality, and that all of this stuff should be within, the United States in every aspect, is important. I'm not saying that we need to force people to pray or force people to go to church. But I do believe that if we take away the values that our founding fathers created this nation on, then we're not going to have a moral nation. I was listening to, I was at a conference in DC a couple months ago, and Liz Wheeler, she said that freedom should not be our end goal. It should be a gateway to being better. And I think right now what we're seeing is people have freedom. They don't realize the price that it costs. And people are just using it as an excuse to be immoral.
Yeah. And it's sad to see where we are now versus even 20 years ago.
I know. I think there is a quote from Obama from, I think it was maybe like 2017, where he was saying that he didn't want to change, or it was something like that. It was before he was president, I believe. But he was saying that he didn't want the definition of marriage to be changed from a man and woman. And guess what happened? It became federalized. And I'm like, what? That is so skewed. How can you change something from what you said only a few years ago before you enacted that federal policy? I think a lot of what is happening right now is because of a failed attempt to address the mental health crisis that we saw, I would say, 2000s upward to COVID, because after COVID, I mean, this really, really ramped up. I mean, I'm only 23, and in high school and college, none of this was a thing. Like, I had a couple of really, really close, friends that were a part of the LGBTQ plus community because I was in theater, but it wasn't ever to the degree of which it was now. I mean, you go to the White House, you have the transgender flag, and you have a trans woman or whatever, I think it was a trans woman, lifting up her shirt and showing the whole world her goodies. And I'm just like, this is what Biden represents as the United States president. This is what we're giving to the world. The entire world thinks we're a joke right now, and it's, again, not what the founders, from my perspective, intended for us to do.
Well, it sounds like you're going to have a heck of a dissertation by the time you're done with your book.
Yeah, right. I mean, this is, yeah. I mean, it's just, it's so important that people understand where we come from. But it goes again to what I was saying. I think it's becoming constitutionalists versus anarchists, because there are so many people that want to get rid of the Constitution, but they don't understand that the founding fathers weren't a bunch of like racist guys. I mean, of course, the United States participated in the African slave trade when it was happening back then. But I think it was like, I was watching a video from Tim Barton, that's David Barton's son, because he went over the history of this. And I think like the United States only participated in like 3% of the African slave trade back when we were in the colonies, because a lot of it was happening between like African American and African Americans. Like, they were selling each other. It wasn't like, we're not as racist as people think. But also, if you look at the timeline of when racism started, like at the founding of America, or just having slaves or whatever, and the time period that we took to give African American people rights is so short compared to quite literally any place in the world at any point in history. So people just don't want to recognize that. They have their 2023 lens on. They're like, oh, they were just racist. Oh, slavery only happened like a decade ago or whatever. And I'm just like, you're not looking at this in the full scope in which you should be. Because if you did, you would understand that America is doing a really, really, really great job.
So something else we talked about before the show is your journey back to Bismarck.
Yeah.
And I had talked about that too, because once upon a time I did leave North Dakota, folks.
Yeah.
I lived in Minneapolis. Where I went to school was actually the suburb that got burned in 2020.
Oh my gosh.
So I watched as that neighborhood was taken away from the gangs, and small families were slowly opening businesses, and the community was growing, and it was amazing. It literally broke my heart to watch that stuff burn on TV.
Yeah.
But I couldn't wait to get back to North Dakota to raise a kid.
Yeah.
When I found out I was having my oldest daughter, like
Oh.
instantly I knew I needed to be back here. And my oldest daughter is a year older than you.
Oh, yeah.
But you were talking about your journey back to North Dakota too. Like, it sounded like you couldn't wait to get out of Georgia.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, at this point, when I moved to Kansas City, I was probably a little bit liberal because I was in Kansas City for 2 years and Atlanta 1. And being out in those bigger cities, seeing where the crime rate is, seeing who's committing the crime, seeing what kind of crimes are committed, and just seeing the culture, how society interacts with quite literally anything, whether it's government, whether it's film, whether it's community, just anything. It's scary because, as a single woman, walking in Atlanta, I'm always just like, am I gonna be okay? Just because, like, the crime there, the homelessness. I mean, on the stinking highway every day, there'd be multiple accidents. There would be cars on fire, and there were huge protests in Kansas City and Atlanta, I believe, during the Black Lives Matter protests. And a lot of these guys were burning down Black-owned businesses. And I'm just like, people just don't realize how good they have something until they lose it. And I'm not saying I lost North Dakota or anything, because obviously I live here now and I have a great appreciation for what I have. But again, we see wokeness, slowly coming here. And I feel like it's part of my duty to try to protect what I love and appreciate so much. But yeah, I mean, living in those big cities definitely gave me a very different perspective on, my career, where I want to live, where I want to raise a family. Um, and then I think a lot of North Dakotans do fall into this trap of, one, they don't travel very much. They don't know what the rest of the world is like. Two, they don't live anywhere else. So again, they don't know what society looks like, what community looks like, what government looks like in other states and cities. So it's disheartening to a certain degree to see all of these people, especially with like the NDSU thing. They're like, oh, it's very harmless. Like, it doesn't matter. I'm like, no, this is the spot in which things are just going to like wildly snowball. It's like you give someone an inch and they take a mile, and that's exactly what we see, the left doing. And it's just so sad. And that's a huge reason and why I'm doing what I'm doing to protect the state that I love, because I want to have a family. I want to raise kids. I don't want to be scared of sending my kids to school to be indoctrinated, or to, have some like school shooter go and like shoot up the school. So, and my country too, because this country is the greatest country in the world. And for people to not recognize that, for people to not have the basic understanding of history, for people to not know the three branches of government is incredibly disheartening. Not to get into like voting, but it's like, how can my vote equal the same as someone that is out doing drugs on the street that doesn't know the three branches of government? I know Vivek Ramaswamy is he's a presidential candidate, is fighting for like a test you have to take before 25 and older, you can just vote or whatever. And I think, like, not to say anything about him, if I would vote for him or whatever, but I just think that's a very interesting policy, and I don't disagree with it, because I think the freedom that we are given, that has been paid for since the beginning of our nation, we should have to put an effort to recognize the freedom that we have, to give us a greater understanding of how we should be as citizens. I mean, duty has just gone completely out the window. Respect has gone completely out the window. Common sense, again, completely out the window. So, I mean, that's sort of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing.
So back to the Vivek thing. Every citizen has the right to vote,
Right.
but Here's what I would like to see. I'll counter your offer with another offer.
All right.
If you're running for
Me.
president,
Bless you.
if you're running
you.
for president, you shouldn't be allowed to advertise through Facebook. You shouldn't be allowed to advertise through Twitter. I want to see these guys get back out to a county level and campaign on their soapboxes and have real debates instead of something that's moderated for 30-second sound bites. Because for me, like for Vivek, he can say that, but I want him to come here to North Dakota.
Yep.
I want him to go out to Kidder County. I want him to go out to Benedict, North Dakota. I want him to go to Ray, North Dakota, and address the crowd that's up there that would possibly be voting him for
Yeah.
him, and see what he has to say.
No,
Because
absolutely.
saying it on a national stage versus saying it in person is two entirely different animals.
100%. I know one thing he does say too is that there are only 3 branches of government, not 4. I was looking at what that meant, and I don't remember which government website it said, but it was like an official United States government website that was saying like media is a 4th branch of government, and I'm just like, no, that's not true. Why is this on like an official government page? So I completely agree with you there.
When you got some time, you should look up the Thomas Church report from like 1975. You'll
I'm gonna
understand.
write that down. You said it was a Thomas Church report.
Yeah, if anything, I can send you a link. I got a copy of it.
Oh, sure, yeah, just do that. That'd be great.
Yeah. So it really sounds like what you're advocating here and what you're doing with your own personal life. It sounds like you're on a journey to be one of the only constitutional attorneys in North Dakota.
You know, that is one of my goals.
Yeah, it is.
Absolutely. I think constitutional law it's a little bit taboo because I've heard stories of, lawyers do constitutional law and they are just taken aback from positions that they could have gotten because they're fighting for the Constitution. Like I had a friend that was saying like one of his lawyer friends wasn't able to run for a certain position or wasn't going to be given a judge position because they had worked a constitutional law case in regards to freedom of speech. And I'm just like, that's really worrisome. I think my final goal, and we'll see where God leads me, obviously, would to be a federal judge for the state of North Dakota, because I do think that those Supreme Court cases, whether it's on the state or the federal level, are incredibly important because they set the precedent for quite literally every other law, regarding that specific case. And I think that's incredibly important. I mean, we see cases like Dobbs v. Jackson, which started out, at a state level and then ended up going to the Supreme Court. And look at just how it changed the nation. I don't think I will ever have aspirations to be on, the United States Supreme Court. But if that's where God leads me, who am I to, deny his plans for me? But yeah, I'm just trying to see where God leads me for sure.
And see, that stigma is interesting. Like you would think as somebody whose job is to interpret the law,
Yeah,
you should have every court should have a constitutional judge on it.
absolutely.
But you even look at North Dakota, I think we have only a handful, if not less, of constitutional sheriffs.
Yeah.
Not even.
Yeah.
And it's to go the journey that you're on. It's going to be an amazing journey to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate it.
I'm really interested to
Very
see
much.
where you go. Because you got a lot of things. You got a lot of things on your plate.
Yeah. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's just like, God, whatever you have for me, I will, accept. And anything that I do is for, furthering your kingdom. And that's, what we're all called to do as Christians.
So what can we do to help out with Turning Point Faith here?
So I do have like a little email chain that I have. So if anyone's interested, they can, I guess, send you their email or whatever, and I can add them to it because that's like my main form of communication, or a Facebook group, but that's a little bit less, just because I do email out a couple times, probably a few times a week, just on what we're doing, how we can get involved. just talking about like NDSU, the homecoming royalty or whatever, just staying up to date on everything. And if anyone is like interested in coming and speaking at one of these events, if you feel like you have something that could benefit our group, that's one thing that we want to do too, is also engaging in equipping us in order to engage and equip other people, right? So those are a couple of different ways that people can get involved. And again, going back to like the 5 little sections that I was talking about, that's sort of what our plan is right now. We've only had, while I've been in this position, we've only had 2 meetings. So the headway that we've made over the past 2 months has been absolutely incredible. And I'm really excited to see where God takes us.
That's awesome.
It is.
Questions do you have for her? Because I've done a lot of talking.
I'm just taking it all in, so I don't really have anything. I'm pretty impressed. So.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So before we get going here, do you have anything else you want to talk about? Do you have stuff coming up you want to talk about?
I mean, we don't really have anything. Well, actually, that's a lie. So we are in the works of creating like a young adult / young person, sort of leadership event. We want to have like all age ranges come to this event and have a couple of young speakers up to like speakers in their 50s or whatever, that are, the intention is to build up leaders in our community to go and deploy them to be able to fight for biblical truth. So that's sort of what we're doing right now. So if anyone's interested, if they have anyone they'd want to like nominate to be able to speak at this, totally reach out to me. We're also planning on bringing in like a really big headliner, so that way it brings more traction. We have a couple names that we are discussing right now and seeing if that's like realistic. But I mean, that's sort of our plan. But also just like praying is so important. I think a lot of the time people don't realize how important and powerful prayer is. So even just praying for what we're doing, or like the leaders in our country, or just for your pastors, X, Y, and Z, that is like one of the first steps you can take in being a part of the mission and helping out.
Awesome.
That's great.
So last question I have here, when you do these events, do you send invites out to the different groups around the state, like the legislators, the young Republicans, stuff like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we are partnered with, a few different groups that do go out and invite a bunch of people. Like we were like North Dakota Can, Concerned Women of America, Be Truthful, Young Republicans. And we just want to partner with like anyone that has the same mission as us, even if it's like super small business or a big business down to like the individual. We're trying to get as many people as we can to fight for God's truth. But yeah.
That's a pretty awesome mission to have.
It is.
So, all right. Well, I think we'll let you get back to your Saturday afternoon, because you've had, it's been a heck of a show. It's been awesome to be on.
It's been great to be on. Thank you guys for having me.
We'll have to do this again.
Yeah, especially. Yeah. And my dad would, I think, love to be on here and, speak his heart as well.
Yeah, no, it'd be great to have Kurt on, because he and I have had a lot of long conversations over the years. So, but yeah, I think I'm gonna let you get back to your Saturday here. It's been amazing to have you on. When you have events that are coming up, if you want, let us know so
Absolutely.
that we can get you out to our audience, because I think what you got going is a pretty neat thing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I appreciate it.
You bet.
But yeah, we'll catch up with you a little bit later.
Cool.
And you have a wonderful afternoon.
Yeah.
Oh, I caught her. Sorry, that was me. Real quick, folks, we're actually gonna have 3 shows this week.
We are.
We brought it up. On Monday, we are going to have Luke Simons join.
Yep.
So that'll be awesome. Tuesday, we will have Dr. Rick Becker joining to talk about property taxes.
Mm-hmm. And the petition, how that's all going.
And then Friday, one of my personal legislative superheroes for North Dakota, Cole Christensen, will be on to talk about his parental rights bills, his domestic terrorist bills, and what he's got coming on for the future. Because, again, another amazing young person doing great things in North Dakota. And then I think we have it hammered down the 10th of October. Kat Perkins may be joining the show for the evening to talk about her exodus from Medora.
That'll be interesting.
And it'll be an interesting conversation. Like I said, you don't always have to agree with everybody, but let's have a conversation about it instead of just not talking about it at all, because that's how we got here in the first place.
Right.
Personally, I know Shilo would probably be rather riding a horse, and I'd probably be rather playing video games than sitting and talking politics. But not talking about it is why we are as a country, why we are
where we're at. Yep.
So
no, I agree. No, it's going to be a busy week, and looking forward to having Luke on. And I know he's got some stuff to say, and don't believe him when he tells you I kicked him off the show. That's kind of a running joke between him and I. He just likes to needle me a little bit, so I'm sure we'll hear about that. Oh, I kicked him off, but I really didn't. So
no,
but no, that's going to be a good show. Obviously, it has to do with the red flag laws and stuff that we were talking about earlier this week. So, but we'll wait for him to get on, and we'll go from there on that. So, but yeah, thank you guys for watching the Saturday edition, and we will see you guys Monday evening.
All right. Y'all have a great day, and God bless.